welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the 5th installment of our Thought Leader webinar series. It's great to be back. My name is Nick Fischetto, and I lead our e-commerce council here at CRC. Today we have Retail Bloom with us to discuss profitability and measuring profitability on Amazon, considerations and best practices around hybrid selling, and then also talking through the latest trends and promotional tactics in the Amazon space. So as I was looking through the presentation, I was really excited for it. I thought what's going to be reviewed today is extremely relevant, pertinent to the environment, today's retail environment, right? You have top line growth in the world of e-commerce slowing a little bit. We have an acute focus on profitability by channel, by SKU. There's senior leaders asking, what's our ROI on ad spend? And so you've got all these different factors at play. And so I think Nicole Reisch from Retail Bloom, who's our thought leader guest today, will be helping us answer some of those questions and walking us through her thoughts, her viewpoints, and perspective on what I just talked about and more. And so super excited for the presentation and conversation today. Per usual, we will do Q&A at the end, and so I know that's always a highlight to get those kind of real-time thoughts and perspectives. So make sure to submit your questions throughout. There is also the slide deck available for download. Right now, you can do that in the resource widget on your screen. And then we will send a follow-up email to all those who registered that are on the call and aren't able to be on the call within the 24 hours after. So either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, you should get an email with the replay and slide deck. Also in the resource widget on your screen, there is another resource the Retail Bloom team has included in there. And then if you'd like to connect with Nicole and the team, you can schedule a meeting with her and the team on your screen as well under the scheduler widget. So wanted to go over those few housekeeping items. As I alluded to, super excited for the presentation today. And I think I'll be chiming in throughout, and then I'll be back to moderate Q&A at the end. So Nicole, welcome.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. And thank you all for attending. As Nick mentioned, I'm Nicole Reisch, co-founder, one of the co-founders at Retail Bloom, and I lead all of our marketing and sales efforts. And I am super excited to be speaking to all of you today. We've partnered with CRC for the last year and a half or so, and it's been absolutely amazing to see all of the CRC reports, especially those where they pull all of you guys and you provide feedback and then they create a report. And I just wanted to do a quick call out to all of you first, because your input in the way that you guys give us insights into how you're running your business, especially on Amazon through Vendor Central or through Seller, really helped me prepare for this. And my goal for today, again, as Nick mentioned, is to hopefully give you some insights into how we're measuring profitability, what it means by seller, by vendor, what to consider going into a hybrid strategy, and then from there, potentially getting into some best practices as it relates to content and advertising, some other things that we're seeing over the last 6 months. So before we get into the agenda, I just wanted to give you some background about Retail Bloom. If you don't know us, we basically are a full-service e-com support team who works with brands across all categories on marketplaces and other channels to do basically 2 things. On the left side is our market service model. You can see at the top portion here, these are typical managed services products that we are helping with our brands, whether they have a vendor account, a seller account, both, whether they want us to help with a third-party seller. It doesn't really matter to us. Our services are pretty tailored to what works best for the brand. But regardless on how they sell on Amazon or Walmart, we're doing brand protection, we're doing content, customer service. After we do Amazon, we typically move on from an expansion perspective to Walmart, to Amazon International or Walmart Canada. We're handling marketing and advertising, and then we're doing reporting, insights, and analytics. On the flip side, you can see our wholesale model. So this was actually a core to the way that we originally launched Retail Bloom, was actually as one of those preferred third-party sellers. So for those brands that don't have a seller account or don't want to have their own vendor account, we can do basically all the services that I just spoke about, but then also do the fulfillment, the pick and pack, replenishment for them, and forecasting. Through those marketplace services, we found that a big key to success is obviously that brand protection piece. And what we found is that when the brands we worked with had buy box challenges, that was usually a symptom of not having a solid brand protection foundation in place. And because of that, we've developed a very unique service offering as it relates to brand protection. So we now offer policy development, we have implementation recommendations and strategies, and then we scale that through technology. Some of those softwares that we use actually remove unauthorized sellers. Others give brands visibility across all platforms, and through us, they can enforce those new policies that we help with. So that's the service side. And then the last thing I want to speak to about us is just how we do it, right? So on the left side, I would consider our inside marketplace track, or our talent, right, our experience. So we are an approved Amazon, Walmart, and eBay agency. And then on the right side is our not even full list of all of these software partners that we use to help leverage those tools to scale our efforts. So we are not a software provider in any sense of the imagination, but we know that in order to manage all of our catalogs, especially when we work with brands with thousands of SKUs, we have to be able to give them the software to help us scale and to help them make decisions. So as an example, if we're working with a brand on Seller Central and Vendor Central, we may use Helium 10 for SEO and rewriting key product copy. We use Salsify as our PIM tool. We use PackView for advertising for Walmart, Amazon, DSP. We use Refund Sniper and Gatita for inventory reconciliation, whether that be on seller or vendor. So just to give you a couple of examples, I know that that's been really valuable for the brands we've worked with over the last several months, is that especially as brands develop their own internal teams, they're thinking like, okay, yeah, I've got this team, but what about all the software that I need in order to implement and scale, right? So instead of our brands having to set up individual relationships with each provider, the benefit of working with us, again, is that you have access to all of these providers through us. And of course, you get access to them, but we're the ones using the data and the software to make decisions and to execute that strategy for you. So as for an agenda today, I have really, again, two big goals. I want to give you an idea of the way that we're helping brands measure profitability on vendor or seller, and then some hybrid considerations. And I would consider that very top level or strategic, right? Like this is where we start of what do we think our profitability should be? And then after that, we'll get into some advertising trends and some content trends that we have seen over the last several months that have been really effective for us. So two goals, again, high level strategy, how do we measure profitability by channel? And then once we have that strategy, how can we optimize content and advertising in the right ways, again, with the goal of increasing profitability. There is a Q&A session at the end, but I will say I have full access to the Q&A. And as Nick mentioned, please ask questions during the session. If there's something that doesn't make sense, or if I'm stumbling my words, which I will, please let me know, right? I can either repeat it or just answer the question in real time. So happy to do that. And worst case scenario, we'll answer the questions at the end or follow up with an email. So again, starting with Amazon profitability by selling strategy, the things that we think about for profitability are really to start with three questions. The first one is, how do we measure it and what are we measuring? So I talked to Nick at CRC and other people in the network, I guess, and a lot of the conversations are coming up like Amazon's not as profitable as it should be. And the number one question I then ask is, okay, but what does that mean? When you're saying it's getting less profitable, is that because of price increases? Is that because of fulfillment challenges? Like, what does that mean? And how do we standardize how we measure profitability by different pieces of our business? So that would be the first question. The second question is how often should we reevaluate it? And with all of the changes in e-com right now, not just in e-com, but at a higher macro level, right? Inflation, shipping charges, once we've developed the system, we need to be able to understand how often we reevaluate it. So we have some type of benchmark. So we'll get into that. And then lastly, how do we scale it? Because I'm going to give you insights or inputs, but it is up to you guys to run this on your own. And especially if you're doing it often, it's a little bit of the pain in the butt. So I'll give you some tips on how we potentially scale it as things change. So how do we measure it first? And what are we measuring? So for us, we may work with a certain company that has 5 different brands. Some of those brands are vendor, some of those brands are seller, some of those brands have hybrid strategies, some of them sell to third-party sellers, right? So the first thing we want to start to split out is by brand, by SKU, by selling platform, right? Whether it be a seller account or a vendor account, and then after that, by fulfillment type. So this is the first consideration when we start to build out all of these kind of massive spreadsheets that we do on the manual side, right? So if you've got a seller and a vendor account, I would suggest that you start with 2 spreadsheets and you're evaluating the profitability for those SKUs based on that seller strategy, right? I'm starting, again, now, what's those inputs? I'm starting with Vendor Central because I know that this community is mostly Vendor Central focused, and I hope this part is a review, but if it's not, hopefully it's some things that you consider. But you would start with, again, by brand, by SKU. Okay, what do I sell this product to Amazon for, right? They have if they sell it for $100, what is their purchase price from me as the brand? As we all know, and we wish it was this simple, but it's not just they place a PO, you accept it, you send them the product, and then you invoice them for that purchase price, right? That is definitely not how it works. There are all of these other expenses that I've tried to summarize, and I know that this is not a full exhaustive list, but things that you could be considering as you build out this kind of profitability spreadsheet, right? So on the left side of the spreadsheet, if you could imagine, you have SKU, then you have the purchase price, and then all of the things to the right are, okay, what are my expenses, right? What are the costs? What are your costs of those products? And then, of course, the next one is immediately, what are your allowances, right? And these are the typical things that get negotiated on a yearly basis. What is the freight allowance, damages and defectives? What's your co-op allowance, right? And then from there, you may have your SaaS program, right? Or AVS, where you're paying Amazon on a yearly basis or a percentage of sales to get an Amazon team. Now, whether that team is effective or not effective or what they do is maybe a separate conversation, right? But there's obviously a cost of that program. From there, you then have merchandising and then promotions that come off of that even more so as expenses, right? So that would be coupons, deals of the day, treasure truck, your lightning deals, right? So all of that can hopefully be added to a SKU level as an expense. And then the next one is basically another huge one, which is advertising. So DSP, PPC, maybe you're driving traffic off Amazon, maybe social media, or maybe you're using influencers and you're driving all of that traffic to Amazon to promote the brand there. Obviously, all of those have a cost. And then the next one is that guaranteed minimum margin, which I think is a little bit of a new thing. We've always seen this. We've never, I don't think I've seen it called that necessarily. I've picked this up from the CRC reports where I was like, oh, I knew that happened, but I didn't necessarily know that that's what they were calling it. But that's basically when the brand guarantees Amazon particular margin. And if they have to drop their price to compete, right, their retail price, eventually they end up charging back the brand. And if this is happening to you consistently, yes, it's an expense and you have to plan for it, but also this kind of screams to me brand protection in a lot of instances, right? Amazon drops their price to match other retail sites, that match other third-party sellers. So if there's a way that you can develop policies to get a little bit better with your pricing integrity and stabilize that retail price, you can minimize those chargebacks, right? And then beyond that, this one is also always tough, not just on the vendor side, but also on the seller side, are these discrepancies, right? So Amazon, even when you get all of the things above, when you've agreed to a purchase price, when you understand all of the other expenses, even after that, you may submit they may submit a PO, you may submit an invoice, and of course there's always discrepancies. And those discrepancies, to reconcile those, that burden is on the brand. It is up to you as the vendor to open up tickets, to tell Amazon, hey, you short paid this. Hey, you incorrectly charged us for receiving problems and shipments, but we can prove to you that we followed all of your requirements, right? So I would say that this is a whole nother piece of the business that we've talked about a whole ton. And if you think that Amazon isn't profitable and you haven't dug into this discrepancy line item, I guess, that is something I would definitely recommend getting into, because there's a lot of ways to recoup those costs just by opening up tickets, and there's providers. We work with several to help you do that. So again, just, picture by brand, by SKU, you've got this, enormous spreadsheet that you can start thinking, here's my product costs to Amazon, and then here's all of my expenses that end up hitting that profitability. And the point before I get to the seller side that I'm trying to make here is that we don't want to say, hey, it's not profitable or it's less profitable if we don't know exactly why, right? On the seller side, this one I'll get into in a little bit more detail, because I know many of you maybe are exploring that or not as familiar with the platform, but it's a little bit different, right? So instead of sending product to Amazon or Amazon placing POs in a more B2B relationship, you are the seller, right? You are able to capture that top line sales revenue. You're selling it as the retailer, right? They're not placing POs. You're providing inventory to Amazon FBA fulfillment centers. When it sells for $100, you get that $100 less all of these expenses, right? So we call this kind of our net GP, and whether that's the right financial term or not, I'm not really sure. That might be a retail Bloom word, so I apologize if it's the wrong way to think about it. But for us, on the seller side, we take sales, we subtract out our cost of goods, right? We subtract out our FBA fees, we subtract out referral fees, and then we subtract out our returns. And that gets us to a little bit more of a net, which I would then compare that to, if I'm going backwards, the vendor central side. Sorry about that. I'm clicking around a little bit, right? So your net GP on the seller side, when you take sales less Amazon fees, FBA fees, should get you around here, right? Or somewhere comparable to that purchase price of the B2B side or the vendor central side. So clicking back, hopefully this isn't frozen on you, but even after you get to this kind of net GP, you have, again, other Amazon non-order fees on the seller side. So, you have shipping costs, you have advertising costs, just like on vendor central side, you have FBA discrepancies. Again, as a seller, it is up to you to open up those cases and track down why Amazon only received 90 of the 100 units that you ship to them, right? And they will eventually pay you back. But if you don't tell them that it's missing, they're not going to do anything about it. And then lastly, another thing to consider is non-order fees. And if you have a Seller Central account, the best way that I can sum these up is to download the transaction report and look at all of the other columns in that spreadsheet out of Seller Central, because there's things like storage fees or return fees or FBA incorrect labeling fees that they'll hit you with, right? So those aren't huge, but they end up adding up to being another point or two. So just want to make sure that you're considering all of these inputs. This is not a full exhaustive list. There might be items on your side that as a brand you want to be considering, but once you get all of those inputs, you start to create this spreadsheet, right? Now, as the Seller Central side, you can see everything on the left is that GP level, right? MAP, cost, referral fees, FBA fees, return. That kind of gets us to our net GP. And what we do, or what this example is that we have a target of what that GP should be. So, for example, anything under 20 points gets either orange or red for us to trigger us, or to trigger the brand to say, something's wrong here. Your FBA fee is wrong, your returns are too high, maybe it's in the wrong category, a really, really good example of that is that a lot of the outdoor apparel products or performance products sometimes get under sports and outdoor. Well, sports and outdoor referral fees are 15%. If a performance sock gets moved from sports and outdoor to clothing and footwear, all of a sudden that referral fee goes from 15% to 17%, right? So being able to look at your actuals and compare that to your benchmark helps you understand at the SKU level, is something wrong? Am I unprofitable at a sales channel perspective, or am I unprofitable because I'm not realizing that my FBA fees are all messed up or my returns are too high, right? To that right side of that then, if we go to the right of the GP, as I was mentioning, these are our non-order fees that you should also consider. So what is shipping, right? When we ship into Amazon, there's an inbound freight or ground shipping charge that should be included. Those costs are obviously going up. There's some advertising contribution that may change depending on the time of year. You have software, indirect costs, again, non-order fees. So I wanted to give you an example of what do we consider that net GP, and then what are those other things that you don't think of that are also getting into your profitability that eventually get you all the way to the right side, and maybe you have other inputs of this kind of net contribution margin or whatever you want to call it that says, at a minimum, when I consider everything on Amazon, whether it be vendor or seller, this is my target. And when you know that target, then when things change, you can, again, understand why it's going up or down and what to do about it. So to that point, I know that was a lot of words, and I guess maybe I'll pause and throw it over to you, Nick. Anything to add there before I move on to how often we reevaluate this and how?
No, I think just the your point's, I think, an important one, how you don't want to just say like a blanket statement of like it's unprofitable, right? Because all the headwinds we're seeing around cost, I think, are leading to a statement like that being made a lot more often. And so really digging in, like where are we truly unprofitable versus just where are we operationally not efficient? And those could be due to misalignment internally, or the way things were done have just never been evolved as the business has grown. And so no, I think that's a really key takeaway that stood out to me. But I'll toss it back over to you. Awesome.
Yeah, actually, that triggered me to two comments that I probably missed. One of the things I think some of the brands who are on Vendor Central assume that as soon as they transition to the seller account, it's going to be more profitable, because in theory, it would make sense that because you're capturing top line sales instead of a purchase order, right? You'd assume that you pick up margin. I will tell you that if you don't do that analysis of the what it is versus seller versus what it is in vendor, you'll put yourself in a scenario where you're going to try to sell a $10 item on Seller Central account with an FBA fee of $4 because it's a big item with a low AOV. And after all of it's said and done, you're going to think, oh my gosh, I should have just kept selling that product to Amazon, right? So there's a little bit of that too. This exercise can be used not only for changes when fee changes are happening, but if you are trying to understand what the hybrid structure would look like, you can do the same type of analysis. And then the second part I probably missed was that when you are under target, as Nick mentioned, there's some things that you can do operationally to improve profitability, right? On the seller side, you could potentially increase your retail price. You could reevaluate your FBA fees, because a lot of the times those are higher than what they should be. You can, again, look at the right category. You can shift around your advertising budget, right? So once you understand, again, where you're supposed to be versus where you're at, you can start to make decisions about how to improve that. So with that, how often should we be doing this evaluation, right? What I would say is 4 different things. One, every time that there's an Amazon fee structure, I would run this analysis, whether it be on the seller or the vendor side, right? Things are always changing. So on the Vendor Central side, if you're going through negotiations, of course, this is the perfect time to do it. On top of that, on the seller side, there's new FBA changes, which I'll give you an example. That would be another good time. Let's say that you're seeing huge shifts in shipping. again, another trigger to be able to run it at that point. Seasonality, maybe there's changes in advertising, or maybe you are deciding whether or not you want to be investing in DSP, right? Now would be the time to do that if you are having to pull the budget from this Amazon sales channel. And then at a minimum, I would say best practice is to run it quarterly. To hit on the Amazon FBA updates on the Seller Central side, I just wanted to give you an idea. If you aren't familiar with those news updates that come out of Seller Central, here's just 7 of the maybe 12 to 13 things that have changed in the FBA landscape on the seller side since the beginning of the year. Long story short, they are fee increases, they are changes in storage, the way that we, storage types, the way that we're able to send product into FBA. And this in itself is a lot of information. So if you are interested in learning what these Seller Central updates are, but you don't have access to it, you can either just go to Seller Central News, usually those release there, or we have actually an update section on our blog where every time Amazon releases a vendor or a seller update as it relates to operational things or requirements, we are taking that information, digesting it, and then rewriting it for all of our partners. So if you are interested in learning about any of the changes on the screen, for example, here, feel free to go to our website under Marketplace Updates, and you can read an article related to any of these updates. So anytime, long story short, anytime something like this changes, you should be thinking about doing this evaluation to understand what it means for profitability. And then now that I've told you how much work you should be doing, right, how do we automate this? Because it is a lot of work. And the other part is when it is spreadsheet driven, there's a lot of opportunity for error. Your FBA fees might be wrong. Your purchase price might be wrong. The more SKUs, what we find is sometimes brands don't totally have their arms around what their MSRP or their promotional price should be, right? So there's a lot of inputs that the first part is making sure that all of your data that you're putting into the sheet is accurate as possible, because if it's bad data in, it will be bad output, right? But after that, I just want to give you maybe a quick plug here is that at a minimum, standardize the template. Have a vendor central template, a seller central template, maybe a separate one for each vendor code or per brand, whatever it might be. But then as a side note, there are software tools out there to help you. For us, we haven't absolutely found one we love. So if someone on the call has one, please let me know. I'd love to explore it. But this is just a screenshot that we use to help automate all of the things I just talked about, right? So up on the right, we're able to filter by product, SKU, vendor, brand, date range, ASIN, and in the back end, we're plugging in costs and shipping, and then we plug this into or connect it to a seller or a vendor account, and it gives us what our ad spend is. So on a SKU level, as you can see here under the profit margin, all of this is pretty much in real time or by date range. And if it's below that target, and this one is, again, just a mock, right? It'll go orange or it'll go red to tell our team, again, something went wrong. Our return rate exploded when it shouldn't have been. Our ad spend went up too much. So anyways, that was just that. I did just see I got a little off track because I saw a question come in. Someone had asked if Power BI is one of the best software out there. Yeah, so I have looked at that. That is one of the considerations we use before building out this. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't believe Power BI did what we needed to do on the vendor central side. I could be wrong about that. So Marissa, if I am incorrect, I'd love to follow up afterwards. But the reason we had to create this is because we couldn't find one that did both vendor and seller central, for what it's worth. I could be wrong there. Cool. So if there aren't any other questions on the profitability piece, I did want to just give you a couple of bullets on what we're seeing from the hybrid consideration standpoint. So the number one question I get is, well, I'm a vendor, and what happens if I open a seller account, and what will the 1P do potentially as threats to influence my success on the seller side? So 12 months ago, I think I had a webinar with CRC, and this was coming up, but it wasn't it was gray, really. And I think my position at that time was, well, try this and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. I know a little bit more, but I will say that this all depends on the category you're in, the size of your business. One of the big things that we were able to do over the last 12 months is partner with some Amazon teams on the seller side. And what we first do is that if a brand is considering going seller, but they know that they have a vendor account, we go to the Amazon seller team and say, hey, please, can you tell us if this 1P is a top brand in that category? And if the seller team comes back to us and says, yes, this brand is a top brand in this category for the 1P team, we know that we're going to probably have some obstacles that we're going to have to get over, whether that be not being able to get a seller account live, whether that is not being able to do FBA or create UPCs, right? We can go down all of those potential hurdles, but we know that if the brand is one of those top brands, most likely there's going to be some hurdles that we might have to get over. And when that happens, we typically go back to the brand and say, hey, you're going to run into obstacles either now or later, so we might as well have an open conversation with the 1P team and see what they're open to and help them understand why we're doing this. If the brand doesn't have a vendor manager, or they've had this, fairly, legacy Vendor Central account that's flying under the radar and isn't considered a top brand, typically when they launch a new seller account, we don't have as many obstacles. So we may not have to find a vendor manager to have a conversation to say, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. Let's have an open dialogue. It's more of, hey, you're good to go. Let's go. And it'll be less likely that we have those hurdles. So that's our number one finding that's been helpful. We now can be much more proactive than reactive as it relates to helping brands launch a seller account. Then the number two issue, if not maybe number one, equally as important, is that let's say the brand says, I need to do a seller account, I'm turning off these SKUs in vendor, or maybe I'm launching new SKUs through seller. If they don't know what their estimated buy box win rate is, it's a huge red flag for us, because that means that they don't have their arms wrapped around how many sellers are on the platform, their pricing across the Amazon, and even more importantly, maybe they don't have visibility into their pricing on Walmart, on Target, right? So I think one of the biggest advantages, and sometimes the things we take for granted on the Vendor Central side, is that Amazon, even though they may charge you back, is always going to win buy box, right? For the most part, as long as they have stock, 95% of the time they're good to go as long as they're profitable, right? And they fight against the other third-party sellers for you. When Amazon, as a seller, is not there, ships and sold by Amazon, that goes away, and it's now ships by Amazon, sold by you. You now have to compete on buy box with all of the other sellers on the platform. And this has been talked about from the beginning of time for me, since the beginning of Retail Bloom. This has always been a huge piece of our business. But I do think that brands are getting much more comfortable about developing policies. They're understanding the importance of talking to their distributors, talking to their retailers about, hey guys, because of inflation, because of margin issues, right? We want to increase our retail price. We want to implement these policies to help you, and also help you as the seller, when you launch those accounts, have the best chance of winning buy box. So I cannot reiterate that one enough. That's always a big discussion. Other more tactical things, this is really once you get in the weeds. Typically, we try to keep the source of truth on the Vendor Central side for content efforts. If you have created an ASIN within Vendor Central, even if you have brand registry in your seller account, it is going to be difficult to update that. It's not impossible, but a lot of times you'll end up updating content through Seller Central, and the old Vendor Central content will trump it, right? So what we typically say is, if you've built the UPC in vendor from a catalog perspective, not necessarily meaning who sells it, right? But the catalog should be managed through vendor account. And if you're creating new UPCs and you only want to offer those to seller, and you can, then do that. Someone had asked what rate is considered as good buy box. If the intent is for you to launch your own seller account, if you're not getting 80% buy box or higher, exclusive of being out of stock, because sometimes that impacts it, right? You're missing out on sales efforts. You have less control over your advertising, and so sorry, let me simplify that. Anything less than 80%, if you are trying to be the primary seller on Amazon, is probably too low. Okay. Next is that think about running advertising campaigns, especially when you have a vendor and a seller account, in one place. I was looking at a couple of brands over the last 60 days where they had a vendor account, had a seller account, had campaigns going in both places, were bidding on their own branded term in both places. And the first reason I saw, I was like, something's wrong here. Their cost per click for their branded terms was like $3.50, where it should have been like $1.25. And what I found was that they had the same keywords being bidded. They were bidding on the same keywords in both accounts, and Amazon doesn't know that you own both of those Amazon advertising accounts, right? So they were bidding against each other and driving up that cost per click. So long story short, keep all of your ads in one place. I know that in Seller Central account, if there are certain UPCs that are only available there, right, from a sponsored product ads perspective, you probably have to keep them there, but just be careful that you're not bidding against yourselves, and then also make sure that you're not bidding against other third-party sellers. On top of that, your store is usually typically built on the vendor side, so in order to do sponsored brands, right, you would want to keep that all in one place, have the campaigns in one account driving to the store. And then lastly, why isn't this clicking? Okay. Consider if you're going to go down the 3P route where you're going to have approved third-party sellers on top of Vendor Central, consider what role those sellers are going to play in advertising efforts. So if you are doing all of the branded ads through your own vendor account, through your own seller account, maybe there's certain keywords or certain products that your sellers want to be advertising. And just be mindful about who's spending what and what type of co-op partnership budgets you can start to develop with those third-party sellers. I personally think that it's a luxury, or it's a benefit to the seller to be able to sell your brand as an approved seller. And as part of being approved, they have a responsibility to represent the brand for you, maybe potentially allocate funds to that. Or maybe on the flip side, you say, hey, third-party sellers, you can be there, but no one can spend on advertising. I'm going to spend it all. So different ways to approach that, pros and cons to each one, but just something to consider. And then lastly, we're having some brand registry challenges. Overall, if you plan on keeping that vendor account open, I would say try to keep your brand registry account just linked to that Vendor Central account. There's not a whole ton of upside in linking the brand registry account to your seller account. And we find sometimes, this isn't for certain, but sometimes we find that when that happens, you aren't able to create certain UPCs. So as much as you can keep the catalog again in Vendor Central, you're probably going to benefit the most that way, or it's going to be easiest to update that catalog and get new things live. Okay, Nick, I'll pass it back to you. Any other questions before I flip into advertising?
On the hurdles, challenges, we sometimes just refer to them as hybrid blocks. I know we've had that discussion many a times. Directionally, are you seeing those challenges ease up? And maybe that's Amazon, maybe that's just you guys getting more efficient at the process. Maybe it's Amazon loosening restrictions, because something that we've talked about and really have seen over the past like 30, 60, 90 days is Amazon now pushing very much for greater assortment. And I think what you see in the news around all their warehouse capacity, them building out their fulfillment network, they have the space, right? And that's not what they had for the past 24 months. So point is that, are you directionally seeing it easier to list items and be a hybrid vendor seller, or maybe the answer is no if you're still in that top account range?
Yes and no. We're seeing a little bit of both. So for the brands that have been blocked, right, those top brands where they've had this hybrid strategy in the back end, the 1P is being a little bit more direct and the 1P team is being direct and coming to brand and saying, we're done with you having the seller account, right? Let's open up a discussion and how this works for both parties. And that kind of just tears the top open and you have just a real conversation. Sometimes it's contentious, but on the back half of that, you're going to get an answer, right? They're either going to unlock the seller account and allow you to open up those UPCs again, or you're going to end up saying like, hey, I've got to create them in Vendor Central, right? And then link to them in Seller Central. So our team has gotten much better about being finding workarounds, I guess is a better way to say it, right? There's definitely different tactics that we found to get around it, whether we create UPCs in our own seller account, right? And then have the seller link to those ASINs or have the brand link to those ASINs. Or maybe we create them in Vendor Central and we mark them obsolete, but then at that point the ASIN's created, right? So there's definitely workarounds that our team, especially our content operations team, has gotten a lot better at trying to get to the end goal faster. But I will say for, again, those bigger brands, and I kind of appreciate it because it's just like, if we're going to have a tough conversation, let's have it, right? This is why I want to open up a seller account. This is why it doesn't work for vendor, this particular SKU, right? How do we get around it? So that's what we've been seeing, I think, a lot over the last 6 months. And we've had some accounts where the seller account gets to expand and we're good to go. And then we've seen other times where the brand says, fine, we'll give you everything and we'll set up drop ship, but we need some protection of X, Y, and Z.
Have you seen any, and this was a question that came in, any 1P brands walk away completely in favor of going 3P, or is it more testing the waters in hybrid first? Has anybody kind of taken that full leap?
Yes. We've had a very large CPG brand that recently did that. That I wouldn't be able to share on this call, but it definitely is possible. And the reason that they did that, funny enough, it wasn't even like a profitability conversation because we had actually gotten through all of that. They just wanted control of the channel and they didn't really trust the 1P team and thought, hey, long term, I want to be a seller in this space and I'm going to take that leap. So it has happened. I wouldn't say a whole ton. But it was, I will tell you that decision, I was working with them over 12 months before they got to that conclusion.
Fascinating. Well, I'll turn it back to you. I know we got plenty to get through still.
Cool. Okay. So we've gotten through the profitability piece. I know one of those huge line items, right, is advertising. So this isn't going to be as extensive as what we just went over, and we're flipping gears a little bit. But what I did want to give to you is just some of the trends that we are seeing on the PPC side. So for sponsored products and sponsored brands on Amazon, one of our partners, PackView, we leverage their software to manage our campaigns. They recently released their cost per click report for Q1. And I just, again, you will be able to download this if you want to get an idea. Just give you some benchmarks of what's happening by quarter as it relates to click-through rate, cost per click, conversion, ROAS, whatever it might be, right? And some of the things that I have seen that I thought were worth calling out is that the click-through rate has significantly improved year over year. Not like it's absolutely huge, right? As a whole, it's still, less than 1% on both sides. But what I will say is that Amazon's getting very good at giving advertisers the ability to be more creative in the way that they are representing the products. And I think as brands, as sellers, as service providers, we get better at understanding who we want to target with what product, right? We'll see this click-through rate go up, which has been, I think, pretty optimistic. And again, because we are able to improve the creative and improve our target. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that on the conversion side, the sponsored brands conversion went down. And I don't know this for sure, but when I look at some of the brands that we work with, I think that this is happening maybe for a couple of reasons. Again, this is all anecdotally, just my own thoughts on this. But one, sponsored brands are obviously getting more competitive, right? More brands, more sellers can run those campaigns. The other thing that I'm finding is I feel like we had this huge initiative to go after Amazon stores, and then we didn't really make it a priority. So we still have these sponsored brand campaigns running up at the top of search, but when customers get to the store, they're seeing out of stock product, discontinued. I hate on the apparel side, sometimes it'll be the middle of fall, but the entire store is based on their spring releases. So I just want to call that out, is that if your sponsored brand campaigns aren't performing as well, don't think so much about the target or the keyword. Think about the landing page. Where are you directing that traffic? And once the customer gets there, do they have the best chance of converting? So those are my couple of call outs for Q1 on sponsored product and sponsored brands. And then the other thing that I wanted to call out, and we talk about this with every brand that we partner with, especially when they say, hey, I need Amazon to be more profitable, but I definitely know the importance of Amazon advertising. We typically show them this customer funnel, right? Where we have ad type on the left and keyword type or target audience on the right. And we start to give them an idea of how much is it going to cost to own this portion of the customer funnel, right? So your branded terms, your defensive campaigns, that's going to cost you 5% of your total sales, right? So your baseline is that you have to dedicate 5% of those sales back into advertising. As you go up, as you get into sponsored display, DSP, right? You have to know that you are targeting a bigger audience, but that audience may not necessarily be in consideration or conversion, right? So as you drive awareness, you have to know that you're going to be spending more. So we have to find this balance, and that's why we want to do the profitability at the SKU level to say, who am I going to try to target with this product, and what am I willing to spend in order to get that customer in the funnel? Okay. The other point that I am finding, I'm going to skip through this one, is that the same brands who say, hey, Amazon is less, and I'm generalizing, by the way, a lot of the brands I talk to that say, hey, Amazon is less profitable, also are spending some pretty hefty budgets in DSP. And not to say that DSP is not impactful or useful. It is absolutely fantastic, and it's definitely a part of our long-term strategy. However, if you aren't doing sponsored product ads, sponsored brand ads, and sponsored display well, and you're only focusing on on-site searches or on Amazon specifically, I would highly recommend going back to sponsored display before spending thousands and thousands of dollars in display. Or in DSP, sorry, I'm mixing those. So what I'm saying is that your DSP budget should be probably separate than AMS, and before you do DSP, max out sponsored brands, sponsored products, and sponsored display. Because a lot of the things that you used to only be able to do in DSP, you now can do in sponsored display with a fraction of the budget. So here's a comparison that I'm not going to get into for sake of time too much in the weeds, but you can see what is sponsored display, how does it work, what's your reach, your monthly budget, potentially your audience, right? And then what would DSP be, which is, again, more top of funnel, and you can drive traffic to other places. But sponsored display is probably one of the most exciting things that I would say on the Amazon advertising side that we've seen. You are able to drive traffic both to Amazon and to external websites. And it's either through audience, again, potentially going more upper funnel, but a limited budget, or product targeting, which could be remarketing, whether they viewed or purchased. So just wanted to give you some ideas, and I don't want to get too much in the details outside of just, if you're not doing sponsored display, consider it, right? Here are some different ad types that we've run for our partners over the last 6 months that have done well. And I wanted to give you an idea of what that creative looks like. And just know that these products these ads aren't only on Amazon.com, but they're also on all of the other potentially websites for retargeting, right? So for example, if for our partner Beauty Blender, someone comes to Amazon.com, they don't decide to purchase, but they go to another website, we are retargeting them on that other website to drive them back to Amazon, and then able to offer these types of coupons. So really high level, here's some ROI. It's been really, really great for us. And the other really awesome thing is that you can measure new to brand sales, units and sales for these campaigns. So yes, maybe the ACoS is a little higher than what we want, but typically they're driving new customers versus repeat purchases, which has always been nice as you think about e-com as a whole. I've got about 10 minutes left. I have 3 other slides. I'm just going to dig into a couple of things on the content slide. I know we talk a whole ton, we always have, about SEO, titles, imagery, video. Not that those aren't important, but I wanted to call out a couple of things that we found to be really exciting and things that we are initiating and implementing into our content strategies. So the one is Amazon Posts. This has, it's been around for a while, obviously. We don't have all of the insights that I would like to have for Amazon Posts. Like, for example, I don't believe when a customer clicks on a post and then they purchase, you don't get to see that yet. But what you do get to see is click-through rate. And what we're comparing as kind of like a no-brainer is, what is our click-through rate in our ad efforts, and then what's our click-through rate on our posts, and how do we drive up that click-through rate? Because still today, Amazon posts are free. Amazon is not charging you for this. And if you go to any of your products and you're not running posts, like if you're on mobile and you don't have these set up, I guarantee if you go to a product and scroll down, one of your competitors is running a post on your product. So just wanted to give you a case study of what we're doing, right? So for Beauty Blender, over the last 12 months or so, our click-through rate on these posts have been 400 times that of sponsored product ads, which in our eyes, because it's free, is an absolute win. And some best practices that we find is cadence, right? Post as often as you're posting on your social media. And if you don't have social media, best practice, I would say a minimum 8 to 12 per month. Test it out, test what the images are, right? What the text is, potentially provide a coupon. And then the other thing is, we're using some of these insights to help us understand potential bundles or packs, or what the checkout looks like, what our baskets look like for our customers. So using some insights from posts to make decisions about the way we want to merchandise our products. And then on the store side, one of the really cool features, again, in the last year, maybe a little bit longer, is that follow button. And when your customers are able to follow your store, you then can manage your customer engagements to email them through Amazon with new product releases or upsell opportunities. So we are, on all of our storefronts, creating this kind of top line banner ad to say, follow us here, or follow us through our posts, whatever it might be. And that's been pretty successful for us. And then just some other things, right? I mentioned, make sure you're updating this store regularly. People, especially if they want to follow you, they're following you for a reason, right? They want to come back to Amazon. They want to see what other products you have. So just make sure this is not a set it and forget it, especially if you're driving into that sponsored brand ad. So homepage is usually more brand driven, video. Why are you better than your competitors? But one of the things that I would say is, the fewer number of clicks, the better. It is still a purchasing platform, right? So as we get to other sub pages to the right of that home screen, just make sure that the products are up at the top of the page, and you can say add to basket. So things that we are testing, again, bundles, and then some KPIs, right? Measuring revenue, comparing your Amazon store sales to your total sales, measuring organic versus paid. We typically see that the AOV, once we get the customer to the store, their average order value is higher and their conversion is higher. So start to compare, right? Like, if you don't want to make stores a priority, compare your performance on your detail page versus your store. And there's probably a story in there that says that this should be a big focus. So lastly, just some brand story year over year. I'm running out of time, so I'm going a little bit quicker here. But in the example of Beauty Blender, they already had a pretty well-established brand on the platform. But since we've been able to make these updates consistently, we've had some fantastic year-over-year growth for units sold, average order value, new-to-brand customers. So this is a big thing for us. And we're also, if the brand is open to it, encouraging them to promote that Amazon store link on their social media efforts, so we get some of that off Amazon traffic. So summary, closing it out today, I just have a couple of things. If you wanted why is this important, right? How do we summarize this? One, understand and develop a process for measuring profitability by SKU and by selling channel. Reevaluate your advertising goals based on those GP targets. That's one of the #1 levers that you can pull if profitability is too low, right? At the SKU level, how much am I advertising? Beyond that, make sure you are spending in Amazon display and totally getting the most of that before you go to DSP. And then just keep in mind, you can prioritize non-PPC related tools. There are still some free things that you should be taking advantage of for Amazon posts and Amazon stores to improve conversion and to improve that customer experience. So that was the summary there. I'm leaving us 4 minutes. I know there's some questions, but Nick, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, and there's a question that came in, and I can maybe give my thoughts on it, and then love to hear yours as well. Around, have you seen a shift to more top of the funnel advertising focus from Amazon, from the Amazon advertising teams, citing the NFL Thursday night football games, and then also asking around Amazon Marketing Cloud AMC. So there could be a whole hour-long webinar on AMC. But I'd say yes, right? So the first part of that question, like, have you seen more of a shift to top of the funnel advertising? We have certainly seen that, and it's a big opportunity for Amazon, and it's all about them going from capturing that trade spend to brand spend, right? And all of a sudden, it's a little bit more of a steady revenue stream for them. It's not as tied to their sales growth or GMV, and you could correlate their advertising and sales growth right now. You could see the chart, and it spiked during COVID, and it turned over as it goes against tougher comparisons. So steadier income stream, continues to be high margin, and it's a whole new bucket of funds. The Amazon Marketing Cloud, certainly seeing it's early innings, but I think that data is just getting tapped into, and it's really cool. I think what Amazon's doing, kind of giving you the keys to the castle, if you will, and giving you power to create your own solutions. And so I think that is different than how other advertisers have done it in the past, and I'm excited to kind of see where that takes Amazon. Nicole, do you have any kind of opinion, perspective, agree, disagree there?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, because this webinar was on profitability, right? It's a lot of the times it's hard if a brand is coming to us and they're so transactional, I guess, when it comes to Vendor Central, right? Like, they're trying to get a return for every dollar, right? They have to see that return right away. It's tough to go into DSP, and it has a completely different KPI. There's completely different KPIs for DSP or upper funnel, right? And those are absolutely fantastic, and definitely a piece of our business that we love. I just didn't focus on it a whole ton, because I know if a brand's trying to cut spending, DSP or top of funnel that doesn't have that immediate return usually is the one that gets cut. So yes, we are loving all the things that are happening in DSP, but especially our legacy brands, right? We're focusing on making sure that we're optimizing the PPC side before going there. The other part is they're usually two different budgets, right? Like, DSP is more of a marketing brand building budget, and that's more of like the great creative and making sure you have the right assets. There's a potential budget for that. And then there's a separate budget of like, all right, once we're getting lower funnel on platform, what does that look like, right? So just two different trains of thoughts.
Certainly. Well, we are about at the top of the hour. We got a few questions we didn't get to, but Nicole, for people that want to get in touch with you, you got your email on the screen. Any other ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so that's my email address, my phone number. If you click on any of the CTAs on our website, I will tell you all of those go to me. So I will hopefully very quickly get back to you. But I would love to have conversations with anyone on the calls. If there's anything that I said, especially on like the software side or hybrid stuff that you are seeing differently, that you just want to network on, please let me know. I would love to learn from you and hopefully share with you in more detail what we've done. And then on top of that, if you would like to do an Amazon audit, right, advertising content, digging into brand protection, would love to have the opportunity to do that too. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone.